I used to believe that some doors stay closed for a reason, that you can live beside a truth for years and never once turn the handle, as long as nobody makes you look at it. Then one Tuesday night, over a plate of cold pasta at the restaurant on 9th Street, my roommate walked in with his hands in his pockets and his jaw tight enough to crack, and I watched 3 years of careful silence start to come apart. I still don't know if he came there to stop something, or to finally admit something to himself. What I know is that he looked at the man sitting across from me like he'd lost a fight he didn't know he was in. I smiled at him like everything was fine. It wasn't, because 2 hours later, standing in our kitchen at midnight, he said 4 words that undid me completely, and nothing between us was ever simple again. But what happened next changed my life forever. The restaurant smelled like garlic and candle wax, and I had picked the corner table on purpose, far enough from the window that nobody I knew would walk past and see me sitting across from a stranger with soft eyes and a nervous laugh. His name was Theo. We'd matched 3 weeks earlier, talked mostly about hiking trails and bad childhood haircuts, and this was our second date. He was easy to be around, which after the year I'd had, felt like enough of a reason to keep showing up. I hadn't told my roommate, Callum, where I was going. Not because it was a secret exactly. More because some things felt easier left unsaid in our apartment, where the walls seemed to remember every conversation we'd never quite finished. Callum and I had lived together for 3 years, since our second year of college. He was the kind of friend people described as solid, steady hands, dry humor, the guy who fixed your bike tire without being asked. He'd had a girlfriend, Priya, for most of that time, until she moved to Seattle for a job in the spring, and the relationship had quietly ended somewhere over a shared calendar and a series of unanswered texts. He hadn't talked about it much. He hadn't talked about a lot of things much. Lately, I was halfway through telling Theo about the time I broke my wrist trying to skateboard down our dorm stairwell when I felt it. That prickling at the back of my neck that means someone is watching you before your eyes ever confirm it. Callum was standing just inside the door, in his gray jacket, looking like he'd walked in expecting an empty table and found the opposite. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he lifted 2 fingers in an awkward half-wave, mouthed something like sorry, wrong place, and walked straight to the bar instead of leaving, which made no sense at all, because Callum hated eating alone in public. He always said it made him feel like a display in a window. Everything okay? Theo asked, following my gaze. Yeah, I said too quickly. Just my roommate. I watched Callum order a drink he didn't seem to want, and stare at the bottles behind the bar, like they owed him an explanation. He didn't look over again. He didn't have to. I could feel the tension coming off him from 15 feet away, sharp as static. By the time Theo and I said goodnight outside, a brief, easy hug, nothing more. My phone had 3 texts from Callum, sent in the 20 minutes I'd been inside. Hey, you good? Never mind. Forget it. I stood on the sidewalk a long moment before I typed back. Heading home now. He didn't respond. He was still awake when I got back, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea he wasn't drinking, the steam long gone. The apartment was dark except for the light above the stove, the one we always left on for each other, an old habit neither of us had ever bothered to explain. You didn't have to leave, I said, dropping my keys in the bowl by the door. I wasn't gonna interrupt your date. He said the word date carefully, like it required navigating around something sharp. You could have said hi. Theo wouldn't have minded. Theo. He repeated the name flatly, turning the mug a quarter turn on the table. That the guy from the coffee app? Second time we've met up, yeah. Callum nodded slowly, staring at the tea like it had personally disappointed him. I'd known him long enough to read the difference between his quiet and his loaded quiet, and this was unmistakably the second kind. You've been weird tonight, I said. Before the restaurant, I mean. All week, actually. I'm fine. Callum. I said I'm fine, Milo. His voice came out harder than I think he meant it to, and he winced slightly at his own tone, dragging a hand down his face. Sorry. I'm not. I don't know what that was. I sat down across from him the way I had 100 nights before, back when we used to stay up late over nothing important. You've barely looked at me in a week. You canceled movie night twice, and now you're sitting in a restaurant alone, staring at me like I did something wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. He said it fast, almost defensive, like the idea that I might think that was somehow worse than whatever he was actually feeling. It's not about you doing something. Then what's it about? He didn't answer. He looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look I didn't have a name for yet, equal parts guarded and aching. And then he stood, took his mug to the sink and said, "I've got an early shift. Night, Milo." He was gone before I could say anything else. His bedroom door clicking shut with a softness that somehow felt louder than if he'd slammed it. I sat at that table a long time, replaying his face at the restaurant. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that week that weren't true. Here is something I should explain about Callum and me, because it matters for everything that comes after. I had been in love with him, quietly and hopelessly, for exactly 1 year and 4 months, starting from the night he sat with me on the fire escape after my father stopped taking my calls and told me, without hesitation, without a flicker of discomfort, that nothing about who I was could ever change what I meant to him. I had decided, somewhere around month 2 of that hopeless arithmetic, that the only sane thing to do was bury it. He was straight. He'd had a girlfriend for 2 of the 3 years we'd lived together. He talked about her with the particular tenderness of someone who meant it. There was no version of this where telling him would end in anything but both of us losing the easiest, safest friendship either of us had. So I dated. Carefully, quietly, apps and coffee and second dates that never quite became anything, because some part of me kept comparing every laugh to a version I wasn't allowed to want. Theo was the first person in a long while who made me forget to compare. Which is maybe why, the morning after the restaurant, I decided to stop pretending the tension with Callum was nothing. I caught him in the kitchen before his shift, both of us still half asleep, the coffee maker gurgling between us like a referee. "Talk to me," I said. "Not about the shift. Not about being fine. What's actually going on with you?" He kept his eyes on the coffee maker. "Stupid. Try me. I don't know how to say it without it sounding." He stopped, jaw working, and for the first time in 3 years I watched Callum, steady, unshakable Callum, look genuinely afraid of his own sentence. "Forget it. You've said that 4 times this week. Because it keeps being true." He finally looked at me, and there was something raw underneath the words, something I didn't yet have the courage to name out loud in case I was wrong. "Just give me some time, please." I gave him the time. I regret now how easily I did. Priya called him that weekend. I know because I was in the living room when it happened, and even through his closed door I could hear the shape of the conversation if not the words. His voice low, then quiet, then very quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after someone says something true out loud for the first time. He came out 20 minutes later looking like a man who'd set down something heavy he'd been carrying so long his arms had forgotten what it felt like to be empty. "She asked me something," he said, sitting across from me at the table, not quite meeting my eyes, "about why things ended." And I finally answered her honestly, instead of giving her the easy version. What was the easy version? That we grew apart. Distance. Timing. He picked at the edge of a coaster. The real version is that somewhere in the last year, I realized I wasn't as certain about myself as I always assumed I was. And it wasn't fair to stay with her while I figured that out quietly instead of telling her the truth. I felt my pulse do something complicated. Certain about what? He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer at all. "About who I am," he finally said. "About what I want. About," he stopped, exhaled hard through his nose, like he was physically pushing the next sentence out. "About you, Milo. About how long I've been telling myself what I felt for you was just friendship. Because friendship was the only word I let myself use." The kitchen went very still. "Callum, I saw you with him last week," he said, faster now, like if he stopped he'd lose the nerve entirely. "At the restaurant. And I have never in my life felt something so much like jealousy, and it scared the hell out of me because I had no right to feel that, not as your straight roommate, not as your friend who's supposed to be happy for you. Except I'm not your straight roommate. I don't think I have been for a long time. I just didn't have anywhere to put that, so I put it away instead. I didn't move. I didn't trust myself to." "I'm not saying this to complicate your life," he said quietly. "I know you're seeing someone. I know this isn't fair timing. I just couldn't keep lying to Priya, and I realized I couldn't keep lying to you either. I want to tell you I said something wise in that moment. I didn't. I said, 'How long? Does it matter?' 'It matters to me,' He looked at the table like it might give him permission. The fire escape. The night with your dad. I think some part of me knew that night and spent a year arguing with it. A year. The same length of time I'd spent doing exactly the same thing, in the opposite direction, both of us building elaborate quiet rooms around a feeling we were each too afraid to say out loud, right next to each other every single day. I have to tell you something too, I said, and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. I've been in love with you for about that long. I just decided a long time ago that you'd never feel the same, so I put mine away too. Something crossed his face. Relief and disbelief, and something that looked almost like grief for the time already spent. You're seeing Theo. I'm seeing Theo, I agreed. Who is kind, and easy, and absolutely not the person I've been comparing every date to for the last year. Callum let out a breath that shook slightly on its way out. I don't want to be the reason you end something good. You're not ending anything, I said. I am, if I end it, because of something that's mine to decide, not something you did. Milo, I need to think, I said, standing, my hands not quite steady. Not about how I feel. I know how I feel. About what it means to actually do something about it instead of filing it away again. He nodded, and for once didn't try to fill the silence with reassurance. He just let me leave the kitchen with the truth sitting between us, finally out in the open air where it could breathe. I called Theo 2 days later. I owed him honesty at minimum, and I gave it to him as gently as I could. That something had shifted, that I couldn't keep seeing him while carrying feelings for someone else that I hadn't been brave enough to name until now. He was quieter than I expected, and kinder than I deserved. I had a feeling, he said. You always talked about your roommate like he was gravity. I just hoped I was wrong. I apologized more than once. He told me not to, and meant it, and we left it there. Not enemies, not quite friends either, just two people who'd been honest a little too late to build something lasting. Callum and I didn't talk about it again for 4 days. We orbited each other carefully in the apartment, polite and careful and utterly unable to look at each other for more than a few seconds without something charged passing between us. On the 5th night, I found him back on the fire escape. The same one, the same rusted railing. The city humming below us in its usual indifferent way. You've been avoiding this conversation, I said, climbing out to sit beside him. I've been terrified of this conversation, he corrected. There's a difference. Why terrified? He was quiet a moment, looking out at the skyline instead of at me. Because saying it out loud in the kitchen was the easy part. The hard part is this, actually finding out if what I feel holds up outside of guilt and jealousy and adrenaline. What if I only said it because I panicked watching you with someone else? What if it's not real? It was, I realized, the most honest fear he could have offered me. Not what if you reject me, not what if this ruins everything, but what if I hurt you by being wrong about myself? Then we find out, I said, slowly, honestly, not because you panicked, and not because I'm available now, because we actually want to know. He turned to look at me then, really look in a way he hadn't let himself do in 3 years. I don't want careful, Milo. I've done careful for a year and it cost us both something. I want to just tell you the truth and let it land wherever it lands. So tell me. I think I've loved you since before I understood what that word could mean for me, he said. I think I built an entire relationship with Priya partly because it was easier than looking directly at that. And I think the night I watched you laugh across that restaurant table at someone who wasn't me, I understood all at once exactly how much time I'd wasted being afraid. We didn't kiss that night. I want to be honest about that because the moment mattered more for what it wasn't than what it was. We sat on that fire escape until almost 2 in the morning, talking, really talking, the kind of conversation that unearths 3 years of things left unsaid. About his fear of his father's reaction, about my fear of losing the one friendship that had never once made me feel like a burden, about all the small moments neither of us had let ourselves examine too closely. I need you to know this isn't a rebound from Priya, he said at one point. And it isn't guilt from the restaurant. I need time to actually understand this about myself, separate from you, so that whatever I bring to this is mine and not just reaction. Take the time, I said. I've waited a year already. I can wait for something real instead of something rushed. It wasn't the fairy tale confession moment I might once have imagined. It was better, in its own way. 2 people choosing honesty over convenience, patience over urgency. care over the easy performance of a happy ending. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Callum started seeing a therapist, mostly to untangle years of assumptions he'd made about himself without ever questioning them. We talked more than we ever had, not about romance, but about the actual architecture of who we each were, what we feared, what we needed, what we'd been carrying alone that we didn't have to carry alone anymore. I won't pretend it was simple. There were nights he pulled back, overwhelmed by how fast his sense of himself was shifting. There were nights I pulled back too, terrified of hoping for something I'd spent a year convincing myself I couldn't have. But something had changed in that kitchen, and in the truth on that fire escape, that neither of us was willing to bury again. 3 months later, Callum told his father. I wasn't there for the phone call, but I was there for what came after. Callum sitting on our living room floor with his back against the couch, phone face down beside him, staring at nothing. He didn't hang up, Callum said, when I sat beside him. I kept waiting for him to hang up. He didn't. He just went quiet for a long time, and then he asked me if I was happy. What did you tell him? I told him I was starting to be, for the first time in a long time. He looked at me then, something steadier in his face than I'd seen since the night at the restaurant. I told him there was someone. I didn't say your name yet. I wanted to tell you first that I was ready to say it out loud to anyone who asked. I felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight for over a year. I'm not scared anymore, he said. Not of what I feel, just of doing this well, of not rushing something that deserves patience. Then let's not rush it, I said. Let's just be honest, the way we should have been a year ago. He reached over and took my hand, the first time he'd ever done that as anything other than friendship, and it felt entirely different, deliberate, chosen. I know I made you wait, he said quietly. I know jealousy is what finally cracked it open, and that's not the story either of us would have picked. But I'm not sorry it happened, because I don't think I would have found the courage any other way. I would have waited longer, I said. I already had. We told our closest friends together, a few weeks after that. No grand announcement, just the truth, offered plainly over a dinner neither of us managed to eat much of. Too nervous and too relieved in equal measure. Most of them said some version of the same thing. We always wondered. Apparently the careful distance we thought we'd built so well had never fooled anyone but us. Priya texted Callum a single line when she found out. One he showed me with something like wonder on his face. I'm glad you finally told yourself the truth. Took you long enough. Theo, when I ran into him months later at a bookstore near campus, smiled without any bitterness at all when I mentioned Callum's name. I knew, he said simply. I just hoped I'd be wrong long enough to matter. I'm happy for you, Milo. Really. I believed him. I think some part of me will always be grateful to him for the gentleness he showed two people who weren't ready yet to be honest with each other. A year to the day after that first restaurant night, Callum and I sat on the same fire escape where everything had cracked open. The city glittering below us the same indifferent way it always had, except nothing about the two of us sitting there was the same at all. You know what I remember most about that night? He said. Not the jealousy. Not even the fear. I remember thinking, watching you laugh at that table, that I had spent a year protecting a version of myself that was smaller than who I actually was. And I didn't want to be small anymore. I spent that same year hiding something enormous behind something small, I said. Telling myself a crush was manageable if I never said it out loud. And now I don't want manageable. I want this. All of it. The mess, the timing that wasn't perfect, the year we wasted being careful with each other instead of honest. He laughed softly, low and warm. The sound I'd fallen for 100 nights before I ever let myself call it that. I love you, Milo. Not the confused, jealous, 3 a.m. version of that sentence. The version I've had time to actually understand now. I love you too, I said. I think I have for longer than either of us wants to admit. He leaned over and kissed me then, gently, like a door finally opening onto a room we'd both been standing outside of for far too long. No fear left in it, no guilt, no rush. Just two people who had finally stopped hiding from the truth that had been sitting quietly between them all along, waiting patiently to be let in. Below us, the city kept moving the way it always had, indifferent to the small, enormous thing that had just changed between two people on a fire escape. But we noticed. We would always notice, from that night on, every ordinary evening made suddenly, quietly extraordinary, simply because we had finally stopped being afraid to call it what it was.